Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lanore.
Hey, welcome back to a new week here at the Superhuman Nation. We have great shows planned all week long, kicking today's first half hour off with a very, very important discussion about how to slow and even reverse hair loss. This is both for men and women. I don't want you to think that this is strictly a man thing here, because women suffer with thinning hair and alopecia as well as men. We're going to be talking with Brian Simonis in just a moment. But first things first, let's go ahead and welcome Brian Simonis to the show. How you doing, Brian?
Very well. How are you doing, Carl?
Fantastic. So this is really a really important topic, because guys are vain, but women are vain as well, and nobody wants to lose their hair. Some of us have it happen at younger ages than others. And you have dedicated a large portion of your life to unlocking, understanding, and then offering solutions to people, right?
Yes, exactly. It's been since the early 1990s, and I really looked through the lens of, a full holistic natural form of medicine, sort of an anti-aging standpoint. And so once every area is possibly understood, you have a better idea of, what's really happening with different situations.
Now, why? Were you losing your hair?
Oh, yeah. When I was about age 19, between 19 and 20, it starts to just come up there, and you're thinking, you cannot imagine, maybe the shape of your head, just the person you are. You just can't imagine that life. You don't want to have that thing happening. In those days, unfortunately, all there was minoxidil and some sort of scalp cleansers. There wasn't any type of other, effective remedies, at least known, other than, certain folk medicine remedies you'd hear about.
Minoxidil is not a good choice for men who have male pattern baldness, right? Minoxidil works if you're losing the hair on the crown of the head, correct?
It actually works for both areas.
It does.
That the research has been, most of the vertex, the crown area, but it's not a very good method for various reasons. Side effects, obviously. Others is that it actually could age your skin. It deranges collagen formation.
Huh.
And it's just and it doesn't work very well. And I can get into that if you want, but it's got lousy efficacy, really.
Well, okay, so let's talk about why do people lose their hair. It's not just one thing. There's lots of reasons, right?
Yes, and that's really the thing that people don't really understand. People are looking at sort of a, single bullet, quick fix. The truth is, it's sort of like imagine if you had advanced heart disease or advanced cancer in some way. You really have to go through a litany of different potential causes and treatments, sort of a multifactorial process, to really understand how are you individually affected by different environmental toxicity or dietary or other things that may affect the overall outcome, or how to really mitigate the process.
And so is there a way to, up front, for a person to determine the most likely cause of their hair loss so then they can approach it from the proper therapeutic approaches?
Yes, and the truth is really it's not an immediate thing. Sometimes it's a deep understanding, learning about yourself through a lot of reading. I do have a forum that really gets into sort of how to do this. But once you understand a few fundamental concepts, it becomes a little bit easier. Once people sort of enlighten themselves to, that there's not necessarily a drug or a single particular bullet method to deal with this. So once you understand different areas to cover it, you get into different toxicity, nutrient deficiencies, how diet may play a role, the microbiota, and other things, you can really start making headway, no pun intended, and really start to see a way not just to halt that progression, but also to see some, thicker, improved density.
Now, I have to believe that, and I stand to be corrected, and I'm asking this as a question, but if we look from an evolutionary standpoint, male pattern baldness or that type of alopecia, of hair loss on the head, is not something that our ancestors suffered from, or am I wrong about that? I mean, I don't mean 1800, 1700. I mean, if we look at human evolution, did we always lose hair on the top of our heads?
That's a great question, Carl. And if you look through history, you will find definitely cultures, way, way back were losing their hair. This has sort of been an age-old question. Of course, there are certain indigenous-type peoples. A good example would be the Australian Aborigines. They rarely had any hair loss. They typically lived to be about 100, and they had a superb physicality and incredible dental structure. Great example of this is Dr. Weston Price's seminal work, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, which shows some marvelous examples of nutritional superiority. But of course, you've got a lot of cultures just throughout the ages that were not only had a lot of hair loss, but fundamentally, you can look at this as a stress situation. When at its absolute core, when you have, let's say, typically low testosterone levels, you've got a high cortisol level. This could just simply be the rigors of stress in life, and that could sort of, as you're increasing your cortisol, your stress, your fight or flight response hormones, and you're reducing that testosterone, that in a sense kind of demasculates a person, and at the same time can actually make them more susceptible to hair loss, even though that sometimes common knowledge seems to be inverse of that. But
and then DHT plays a role, and obviously, so the three phases of hair growth. I know the anagen phase is when the hair is growing, but then there is the phase where it becomes dormant, and in between that, you lose the hair, right? What are the three phases of hair growth?
Yeah, so you have the anagen, the growth phase, you've got the telogen phase, and then you have the catagen, the sleep phase.
Right.
And so essentially what happens is typically the anagen or growth phase is going to be about 9 months. And then your telogen, your sort of transitory dormant phase, could be anywhere from 1 to 3 months. And the catagen or sleep stages could be about 1 to 3 months. So when people start to go through progressive male pattern baldness, they literally have a reversal. You have your dormant stages, your sleep stages longer, and of course the growing stage is much shorter.
And the hair ends up being thinner because it's growing for shorter and shorter periods of time, and then and eventually it just stops growing.
Exactly, and also mineralizes, literally becomes thin. So when people get a higher density, the thickness of that actual shaft is just significant to a point where it becomes invisible or very visible.
There's no way for us to address everything in this show. So I want to go ahead and plug your websites real quick, if you can, please, so that people can go and follow up to a greater degree, because you've invested over 20 years into this, and I think that you have the single best source for answers for anybody who's worried about hair loss or has already undergone hair loss, and they either want to stop it and possibly reverse it. What are the websites?
The best site to go to is called immortalhair.org, so www.immortalhair.org.
Okay.
And within that site, you can find not just the male pattern baldness regimen. You can also find a forum, and there's also other websites you can connect to within. There's the other one called longevitypost.com, and you can find that also through immortalhair.org. Through Longevity Post, there are some articles, and there are some videos as well that get into the discussion. So it's a little bit more, if someone doesn't want to do a lot of academic reading, they can simply watch the video, and it's a good overview.
Okay. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back with more of Brian Simonis talking about how to halt and even regrow your own hair. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Channel, where brawn and brains finally meet.
Welcome back to Superhuman Radio. We're talking with Brian Simonis. We're talking about hair loss, how to reverse it, how to improve the quality of your hair naturally. And quite frankly, originally we had planned on having Brian on just for a half hour, but now that I look at all this, there's just so much to talk about. So what we're going to do today is we're going to bring Brian back on at 1:30 after my interview with Luke Tybersky. So, because there's just way too much to cover, isn't there, Brian?
Yeah, there really is quite a bit. It's almost sort of a life study, if you will, but there's so many different
here's what I was thinking. So here's what I was thinking. We think of hair loss in and of itself as the problem, but hair loss could actually be one of the earliest signs that something is going wrong in your body, kind of like the canary in the mine.
That's exactly what it is. It's really a symptom of a much greater problem.
You know, I had a full head of hair until 2008. I suspect I came in contact with a bug that has hampered my gut, and now it's gotten so bad that I'm looking for alternatives to try to rid it. And that's when I started developing a receding hairline. Prior to that, I had no receding hairline whatsoever.
Yes, and that's such an interesting area, Carl, because this is something I've looked at for a long time. And as you know, through the mid-2000s, if you will, that's really where the microbiota has been, a higher laser beam focus there. And it's amazing. It affects your blood sugar, your ability to detoxify heavy metals. It affects, the peripheral nerves. It affects literally so many different things. And obviously the fecal transplant.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that for a second. So we're having a girl on from the UK, I think in 2 weeks, who did a review and found out that there were lots of unintended weird things happening for people who receive fecal transplants to eradicate C. diff. And 2 of these people had the kind of alopecia where they had no hair on their entire bodies.
Yes.
And they both regrew their hair within a year of having the fecal transplants, which says that whatever the fecal transplant did, it readjusted the inner terrain of the microbes in their gut, and they regrew their hair, which means that whatever they came in contact with that disrupted their microbes is why they lost the hair on their body.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because when you use these powerful forces, such as antibiotics, you're destroying strains that cannot be, regained, recapitulated because they're literally non-recoverable. So, difficile and other things could be, a manifestation of this, iatrogenic treatment or doctor-induced treatment. So it's and there's many different amazing ways to deal with these infections as well as this immune system. It's really an immune privilege collapse when you have alopecia universalis, total loss of body hair.
It's almost like, okay, so we're talking about how to regain your hair, but what we're really talking about is how to regain your health, and one of the side effects is your hair grows back.
Exactly. I think, fundamentally for most people in the androgenetic alopecia, your male pattern baldness, that's sort of a side effect, if you will, of nerve degeneration. It's sort of like you've got, your stress system. Your hair has its own hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, if you will. It produces its own hormone, not specifically just for the adrenal glands or the thyroid, but it has its own endocrine organ itself within that hair follicle system.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Most people say DHT, there are 2 DHT receptors, if I remember correctly, on each hair follicle. Once DHT is docked in both of them, it forces the hair to go into that sleep phase, right?
Yeah, so I really like to be saying that 5-alpha reductase 1 and 2 more so than DHT.
Okay.
DHT is a regulated local tissue, but if you look at the blood, it's inversely correlated. If you look at the salivary, that's directly correlated. So most people, when they do the serum blood test, they're going to find a different relationship for DHT. So I like a 5-alpha reductase, really.
Okay, so but why 5-alpha reductase if all it's doing is converting androgens to DHT and not DHT? Because you're saying it's a high level of 5-alpha reductase, which, by the way, is seen in people with higher levels of melanin in their skin, will just bombard the follicle with too much DHT. So address not the DHT with things like finasteride, but instead the 5-alpha reductase.
Yeah, so, and the awesome thing is that there's very gentle ways to deal with 5-alpha reductase. Basically, you're adding an additional electron rather than genetically suppressing the gene so that you're creating these adverse effects and messing with neurosteroids or allopregnanolone or pregnanolone or progesterone and, altering, your feeling of safety. When you're using Propecia, you're basically destroying the ability to deal with progesterone, allopregnanolone, affecting your anti-anxiety and antidepressive states in the brain. So and that's just a bad way to go. There could be neurodegeneration down the road for these types of people, not to mention possibly difficult to reverse side effects, obviously. So there are increasing glutathione levels. We're boosting ways to add electrons so that 5-alpha reductase is essentially reduced naturally with no side effects. So that's one aspect, but there's so much more to this than DHT. In fact, it's really about inflammation. Reduce the inflammation, you're improving the ability to saturate tissue oxygen. You're reducing reactive oxygen species. You're reducing a variety of inflammatory pathways that DHT simply triggers. So when you're eradicating the inflammatory state, you're also neutralizing the reductase elevation, and so you're really not having to worry about DHT. In fact, what's great, a natural way to mitigate hair loss usually involves better performance, better libido, better energy, better metabolic, prowess, more energy in the gym and so forth.
Well, let's talk about this because again, we're going to bring Brian back on at 1:30 to finish this discussion. His website is immortalhair.org. If you are concerned about hair loss or you've already lost a bunch of hair and you're looking for ways to get it to grow back, it can grow back. You just need to look at somebody who's undergone chemotherapy and is bald and their hair grows back. If you remove the insults, then hair can regrow. The follicle isn't dead. Is that correct? It's just dormant.
It is for the most part. I mean, that's a great question, Carl. A lot of people say, how do you know when it's sort of no turning back? Well, you have a progenitor cell, which is the parent cell. When that goes completely dead, what happens there is that hair follicle is now literally morphologically changed to something that produces sebocytes. Basically, if you look at sort of go in a movie theater and you see some bald people in the audience, or rather, viewing the theater screen with you, you'll see they have a lot of this the sebum oil coming out of their skin. So these have become basically sebum-producing glands rather than hair follicle buds.
Is there a way to convert them back once they've converted to sebum glands?
That's a great question. All I know is there's a long window really, where you can actually prevent this conversion. So obviously there are some things with respect to stem cell technology where that could be, but that's usually past the point where people even care at their hair by the time that happens. So really, if you catch this thing early enough, there's actually quite a bit of time you have to mitigate the process.
Do we see a high number of men who suffer from sleep apnea losing their hair? Because I remember reading a study years ago that showed that 2/3 of all the men who suffer from male pattern baldness had poor blood flow to the scalp. One of the side effects of sleep apnea and drops in oxygen is poor blood flow to peripheral tissue.
Yes, absolutely. So this is something I always address because not only do they have higher cortisol levels due to the fact that the body basically feels asphyxiated throughout the night, so that elevates cortisol.
Yeah, you're freaking out. You're being choked while you're sleeping. It's like
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's going to deplete your hormone reserves as well. At the same time, it's going to increase your blood pressure, which is also correlated with male pattern baldness, not just from sleep apnea but other causes. But dealing with the sleep apnea is enormously important, and there's incredible ways to deal with that as well.
Okay, if a man goes to your website or a woman goes to your website, starts to pull from the threads and figures a lot of this stuff out and corrects the problems, will they see their hair regrow? Have you seen people regrow their hair?
I have. In fact, obviously myself is a good example. I think one message that people sometimes misconstrue easily is, we have a quick fix society. Everyone wants the answers to everything. And you look around all over the place, you see laser treatments for acne, you see all kinds of different quick fix methods, that really are ignoring the underlying issue. So this is really about regaining your health. So once you really get down to the big picture, what's wrong with you specifically, and address all these underlying issues, not just your hair grows back, but also parts of your health as well. This contributes to your longevity, your energy, just your overall mood as well. Speaking back to the microbiota again, you're getting, your digestive function. It just transcends to every different area of your health.
The website is immortalhair.org. You have to go there in order to learn everything that you can learn. And you also have resources there so people can find a lot of the things that you talk about. And the things that you talk about are things that you've learned work. Let's be clear about something. People pay you to consult for them to regrow their hair, right?
Yes, so there are some people do that. Most people just do their own reading, so they can do as much reading as they want. Other people simply, want to, sometimes they need a guide because, it depends on how much time they want to spend, personally investigating this. Some people are just, they want to, hire someone who just understands.
Well, they don't have the time. Let's say they don't want to. They don't want to
Absolutely.
sit around and pore over everything in your website. They wanted you to ask them the questions to expedite the process and say, okay, here's where we need to start with you. Which in which case you spend up to 2 hours with the person on the initial triage and intake, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, and it really requires this long, sometimes longer, just because there's so much to it. You know, dentistry is an area I always get into because there's a whole load of research, unfortunately not really known well in orthodox medicine. Big disconnect between dentists and doctors in terms of oral pathology. You know, what does a dentist do to your teeth that results in chronic long-term inflammation that affect, you know, not just your hair but also other areas that are more serious? So imagine if you had a festering cavitation, which is really where you have a low-grade chronic infection happening after an extraction of a tooth, or a root canal or other procedure in your mouth that could be, you know, taking your immune system, you know, south. And so things like that are easily overlooked. Maybe someone had some toxic mold exposure. There's so many different innocent bystanders, things that have not been adequately looked at in mainstream, that have really not gathered enough serious attention. So people are often in the dark about some of these issues that might be affecting them.
You know, it's funny. It's funny that you say this because I just scheduled to have all the amalgam fillings removed from my mouth. I think I've got 9 or 10 of them, and I suspect that the mercury exposure over years has not been the best thing for me. And I want to bang my head against the wall when I think that they put mercury in people's mouths. It's just shocking to me. It's just, you know.
It's horrible. It's absolutely unbelievable. When you think of the Environmental Pollution Agency, some people call it the Environmental Protection Agency.
Yeah.
And, you know, the FDA have many different ways to describe them. So it seems that, you know, for lack of a better word, it seems like the fox is guarding the henhouse in terms of with respect to public health. And for that reason, you have a long history of diseases that are caused by treatments. You know, and multiple sclerosis is probably one of the first emergences of things we saw with the placement of mercury amalgams. And there's so much more than that. And you look at it, just a spiraling autoimmune disease explosion in the last 3 decades.
Well, and it's more than just that. I mean, there's so when we look at things like glyphosate, when we look at other toxicants that are generally regarded as safe by the medical orthodoxy and the FDA, and people are exposed to these things. I mean, just this morning I learned that a 3-ounce glass of wine has as much fluoride in it as a liter of tap water. And those of us who avoid tap water with the plague, but then we choose regular wine, now we have to drink organic wine. It's just, we're getting hit from all sides. Look, we're going to bring Brian back at 1:30. If you are interested in learning more about how to not just use your hair as an indicator of your inner terrain of health and regain your hair as well, it's an important discussion. Back, his website is immortalhair.org. And by the way, in the interim, they have established a coupon code for our audience. It's Superhuman. Is that correct, Brian?
That is correct, and there's various products that help mitigate some of the inflammatory processes with male pattern baldness. So these are great adjuncts. Some people do not have really that bad of a problem, and that alone might just be enough to deal with it. And you know, if they have any specific underlying issues, they can do that, take care of that as well, and that'll just augment their own benefit and progress.
Well, and getting back to 5-alpha reductase for a second, okay? Men who undergo testosterone therapy, this is something that I've observed myself. Men who undergo testosterone therapy but don't use HCG, they do experience some testicular shutdown and sometimes even some shrinkage of the testes, which is, you know, you can live with that. It's not a big deal. However, the testes are the major source of the production of other hormones, including progesterone. So with the downregulation of testosterone, there's also a downregulation of progesterone. Progesterone is a natural 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. So what we see on men who undergo testosterone therapy is about a year after they've been on testosterone therapy, their hair starts to thin. And I've always suspected it's because of the drop in endogenous progesterone without doctors going, you know, doctors look at women like they're really complex, which they are, and look at men like we're really simple, which we're not. So they just replace testosterone and they don't think of anything else. So what are your thoughts on this line of reasoning in my head that with the cessation or the drop in progesterone, we start to see an increase in 5-alpha reductase, which leads to the hair loss that's seen in some men when they've been on HRT for about a year or so?
Yeah, that's a really important topic. So I think of it as zinc deficiency. If you don't have enough zinc, you're not only going to have a weakened immune system, you're also going to have more difficulty attenuating and reducing 5-alpha reductase. Also, there's hyperaromatization. So therefore, you're going to convert more of the testosterone into estrogen. And without sufficient progesterone, it's going to be more difficult to do that. So I would say it's more of not just a deficit of progesterone, but also a zinc deficit, which zinc is not only a natural 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, it's also a aromatase inhibitor.
I was just going to say it'll reduce aromatase as well. I know. Right.
Yes, exactly. And there's so much to this. I think the people often oversimplify it. We can thank Merck, I suppose, for that, where they just think it's all about DHT, and there's so much more to this whole issue. And
so what about topical progesterone, which is readily available on the internet for men? Now it's also my understanding that you have to be patient when a follicle, assuming it can be revived, has been in that sleep stage for a long time. It can take as much as 6 months for it to wake up. Is this a misunderstanding on my part, or is this accurate?
I think that's pretty accurate. And, some people just have so many issues complicating that alone may not do it. Back in 1995, I actually started doing, progesterone treatment per se. I would use a little bit of it on the testes, about 1/8 of a teaspoon. And this seemed to do the job, but you have to really be careful because if you don't regulate it properly, it could actually, reduce some factors, if the more than mahogany, or it could accentuate it. And also, if you use it topically, as in on the scalp, one problem that at least I had faced, because I had done this on and off, is sometimes it brings back inflammation quickly, depending on how what your inflammation situation is. It takes the inflammation away almost immediately, then it just comes raging back maybe 30 minutes later. So it does not work for everybody, and so unfortunately it seemed great on paper. It does work for some people. I suggest they use progesterone therapy to use it on the testicular area,
really,
rather than on the scalp. Yeah.
Okay. This is really interesting. I never thought about that. Now, talking a little bit further about progesterone, the finasteride molecule looks very, very similar to the progesterone molecule with one small carbon chain attachment. Isn't that correct?
Yes. Yeah. It's so funny how that works in the drug world. Same with Accutane and vitamin A as well.
I know, right? I know. But the reality is that progesterone is far safer. While it may have some negative effects with libido and mood when taken at inappropriate times and or in inappropriate amounts for men, it's far safer and has a far shorter half-life in the body than finasteride. I was told that finaesteride's half-life, and correct me if I'm wrong, is something like 20 years in the body.
That's so interesting. Yeah, of course, they have these different terms they use called reflex androgenicity, which is sort of basically where it just shuts on your system backwards, and you just never recover unless you use something like, the HCG. I think that's one of the more effective ways to deal with finasteride poisoning, as I call it. But, the half-life usually is significantly shorter. It's just some people, there's something with the feedback loop, and it just goes awry, and then you're just sort of...
Because I've known men who have taken a short cycle of finasteride while using androgens and lost their libido for a decade. It never came back.
Yes. Yeah, PropitiaHelp.com is a great example of that. You just see horror story after horror story.
I mean, that's just baffling to me. I mean, who cares if you have hair if you can't, the reason men want hair is because they want to attract women and they don't want to look, bald. They're vain. And then here this drug sets it up to where you can't even get an erection anymore. And so you got a full head of hair, and you sit home and look at the mirror. We have to take a break. The website is immortalhair.org.
Protein bars.
You're listening to the Superhuman Channel. We're ripped and we're ready.
Welcome back. I did it all for the hair growth. We're talking with Brian Simonis. We're talking about your hair. Yes, yours, you, right there. The guy with the receding hairline and the thinning in the back of your hair. And Ron Papil was wrong. Don't spray black spray paint on your scalp. That'll just kill more hair. But we're talking about inflammation now. So it's something. Inflammation leads to just about everything. We know that there's a role that the microbes in the gut play in both the propensity to be chronically inflamed as well as to reverse chronic inflammation when you get your gut right. What about in hair loss? How does inflammation affect the follicle?
Yeah, it's such an interesting way. I'm going to try to oversimplify this. If you look at things like any hypoxia-related disease where there's oxygen deficit in the tissue, it's often driven by thyroid. And when the thyroid is not optimally functioning, it's going to increase inflammation from almost all sources. So if you're looking at undiagnosed subclinical hypothyroidism, where you're underactive thyroid, that's going to increase something called transforming growth factor beta, which is something that is triggered by DHT, but it's really the main driver of the actual hair follicle cascade. So that's one thing. Another is thyroid. Underfunctioning thyroid elevates lipoprotein A. That's a very sticky adhesive molecule that's normally found in chronic advanced heart disease. So that can be mitigated. There's also a molecule called DKK1, which is also found, and it's related to thyroid as well. And there's so many others. There's the Genostat pathway. There's literally dozens of others.
Well, guess what? Guess what? Do you realize that thyroid-stimulating hormone, the one that they test for to inadequately diagnose thyroid issues, is a very powerful pro-inflammatory in and of itself? That as thyroid-stimulating hormone goes up, so does your body's inflammation. As a result of it, it causes inflammation. And in fact, when I started on thyroid, I take 60 milligrams of Armour Thyroid a day, which I'm actually going to be asking to raise up to 90 because I tried 120 the other day and I feel a lot better, and I think 90 would be better for me. But by taking a thyroid supplement like thyroid hormone in my case, suppresses the production of TSH, which that has a paramount effect on my whole body inflammation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I should mention is that thyroid-stimulating hormone is relatively inaccurate for many people, where it's just not going to do an adequate job because they have a very narrow range that they look at from a clinician standpoint. And actually, there's a lot of research that pretty much suggests that there's so much more to thyroid-stimulating hormone to properly diagnose either a subclinical or a full thyroid disorder, whether it's hyper or hypo.
Okay, but the real issue here with thyroid hormone is this. There's not necessarily a thyroid hormone receptor, per se, in tissue. But what there is active and inactive thyroid hormone. And T4 is converted into T3 on demand by tissue. So your doctor could check and say, well, you've got plenty of total and free T4, plenty of total and free T3, but you're still presenting symptoms that are indicative of a thyroid problem, and most doctors will dismiss you and say there's nothing wrong with you. What they fail to realize is that unless, and it's impossible for them to measure this without biopsies, unless you are seeing the conversion of T4 to T3 on demand in tissue, you will still have thyroid problems, but you have adequate thyroid hormone circulating. And this is why enzymes like zinc, minerals like magnesium, amino acids like L-tyrosine, selenium, what's the other one I'm thinking of? The selenoenzyme cascade, tyrosine, selenium, and iodine. Without those things, you could have all the thyroid hormone in the world running through your blood, but you've got no thyroid function activity.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Carl. And another thing I should point out is it would be wise for clinicians to look at reverse T3, because it's often caused by elevated heavy metals, which is another problem which destroys, not only mineral absorption, but utility of the actual minerals themselves. You think of mercury versus zinc. You think of lead versus magnesium. And a lot of times when you get rid of these heavy metals properly, you can also have return of enzyme function, and not to mention hair growth also.
So as far as inflammation goes, what I couldn't think of before was angiotensin converting enzyme. I had a lousy night's sleep last night, and my brain doesn't function well. And so angiotensin converting enzyme is produced in the presence of elevated insulin, and is the reason that insulin-resistant individuals, even if they appear to be normal weight, tend to have high blood pressure, because angiotensin-converting enzymes' role is part of the fight or flight function of the adrenal glands, and that is that it's designed to constrict periphery blood vessels, which are not required, in order to shuttle blood into organs and systems that are designed for us to flee or fight. And as a result of that, when it's kicked in all the time, you have this diminishing blood flow into peripheral tissue, because these blood vessels stay constricted so long that they don't even bounce back and open up anymore. And look at the scalp, how thin it is and how much pressure it is, and that how incident gravity affects it. If you want to see something that can easily be choked off of blood, look at the thin scalp.
Yeah, that's amazing way of describing it, because when you look at the side effect of the increased expression of angiotensin, you're looking at hypertension, you're looking at male pattern baldness right there, and of course things like the mineral replenishing of magnesium and other things, and improving insulin sensitivity is going to obviously help get that and normalize that as well. And you have other kidney enzyme, kidney substances as well that are also important for hair growth as well. So that's one of the fundamental ones.
The website is immortalhair.org. It is the culmination of lifelong desire to unlock why some people lose their hair and what can be done about it by yourself and two other guys, Dan Nowitzki, right?
Yeah, Dan Nowitzki and Scott Chiavari.
Yeah, and the website is set up exclusively as a place to get information. They do offer supplements there that they talk about, but it wasn't designed to sell supplements. It was designed to give information, and people said, hey, where can I buy this? Where can I get that? Where's the best place to get it? Now, you don't have to buy your supplements from One Word. We're going to take one quick commercial break, and we're going to come back and talk more. I don't know about you, but I would love to regrow the hair that I lost in my receding hairline. And do you know anything about this GCK copper? You know what I'm talking about? Biotin GCK?
Oh, I sure do. Yeah, we actually sell it on the site as well.
Let's do that. Let's take a quick commercial break. When we come back, let's talk about that a little bit. You're listening to Superhuman Radio. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking with Brian Simonis. We're talking about regrowing your own hair. It can happen. And it's not some Bosley technique where you have to go for surgery or they sew a mat on your head and you say, hey, it's my hair because they made this mat out of my hair. So there's a copper peptide out there that has been studied by a French scientist who I've tried to get on the show numerous times, but the language barrier seems to be the problem right now. And I want to say it's called GHK or GCK, copper peptide. What is it called?
Yeah, there's two forms. There's AHK, and then there's also GHK. And I should mention that GHK is typically used for fine lines, wrinkles, overall collagen and elasticity. And then you've got the copper tripeptides known as AHK copper, and that's used for generally the scalp or hair color care. And so what that does essentially is it helps produce superoxide dismutase, which helps fight the superoxide radical, which is a very, very powerful free radical that just, creates hydroxy radicals. And this has really helped for downregulating some of the inflammatory factors behind the miniaturization of hair. And so this is a topical that's used.
I have an injectable, 50 milligrams of an injectable peptide at home that I've got to use pretty soon because it's going to go bad. But I want to say it's copper peptide GCK. And it's supposed to regrow hair. But now you said that it can actually change the color of the follicle back to the normal color?
Yeah, so on one of my other, you could call it a sister website, this is found through immortalhair.org, called longevitypost.com. There's an article I wrote called Reversing Gray Naturally. And this gets into, exactly why. And you can say the two primary reasons why hair does go gray is you have a combination of increasing prevalence of hydroxy radical. You also have, in other words, you have a higher level of hydrogen peroxide for the fact that your thyroid is slowly diminishing in capacity while you're increasing an enzyme or decreasing a catalase enzyme, which catalase is an enzyme that basically helps deal with the hydrogen peroxide increase from thyroid problem. So what this does is it's sort of like you're bleaching your hair per se from the inside out, creating, breaking down that melanin, which is responsible for the pigment. And there's an enzyme called tyrosinase, and that is a substance that's not just produced by tyrosine, but it's also produced by copper. Copper is an essential cofactor in that enzyme production of tyrosinase, which is responsible for the actual pigmentation of hair. And there's a little bit more to it, but the website gets into more of the nitty-gritty detail.
So topical, using this topical copper peptide, does that actually affect your hair color?
It should. Now, personally, I just take a little bit of oral copper, and I take that with zinc as well, have a nice little balance there. But usually that, and if you add on something called tocotrienol, which is, the cousin of vitamin E, tocotrienol.
Yeah, tocotrienols. And I take a full spectrum vitamin E supplement that's all for tocopherols and all for tocotrienols. Is that adequate to just take that?
It might be adequate enough. I like the idea of taking all 8 isomers like you are, along with a little bit of copper, because what the tocotrienols and the tocopherols are going to do, all 8 of those isomers together, is going to reduce the effect of the hydroxy radical and increase your catalase. But you might need some copper as well to produce that enzyme tyrosinase to also,
But let's be honest here. If you're not applying it topically, and even if you are applying it topically, and you are suffering from poor blood flow to the scalp, it's akin to loading the hopper up with fertilizer, but the hose doesn't go out into the field. You know what I mean?
Yes, and that's a fantastic point. That's exactly the problem when it comes down to something like male pattern baldness. You're having this. There's a reason why scalp blood flow is a lot less than people with full heads of hair. So assuming that you get your insulin resistance under control, I've thought about. I'm a huge fan. I invert at least 3 or 4 times a week for brain function because it helps to keep vasculature in the brain wide open. But I feel it in my scalp and in my face. My face and my scalp get so red. And I've often thought maybe while I'm hanging upside down, I should vigorously massage my scalp. Now, that's counterintuitive because most men who are losing their hair, they don't want to touch their scalp. They're afraid they're going to pull hair out. What about just plain old mechanical stimulation of the scalp? Back in the day when I was a kid, the barber used to wear a vibrator on his hand, and he would massage your scalp with it. Yeah, it's even though it doesn't really address the crux of the issue, why there is reduced blood flow there, it certainly does work for a lot of people. In fact, I have some people who are in such a low budget, all they do is do scalp massage. Sometimes they have a very elastic scalp. It does not work for everybody, but it can work miraculously for some people who really have no money to spend on any other methods. But sometimes it could be something like a structural defect that can be fixed properly with a proper adjustment, and that it can actually improve the pressure on the brainstem and actually increase blood flow to the scalp without any other intervention. Sometimes or the sleep apnea, as you suggested, could be something, outside just your general diet that could be affecting, what's there. And of course, insulin resistance, something it's always good to touch back on, is that affects your nutrient absorption. You think of diabetes mellitus, which is so prevalent these days, it literally means Greek for right through, meaning you're losing the nutrients are going right through you. And then you've got these other things like we were getting into the glyphosate, courtesy of Monsanto, and that's destroying not just the microbiota through the shikimate pathway, it's also disrupting liver enzyme cascade.
Right.
C450 enzyme. So all these things play some role. And not to mention you have over-farming of the soils. So what little minerals we do have are not really getting readily absorbed and utilized. And it just goes on and on and on. You can have food allergies that could destroy the villi, which is that carpet shag-like production in the intestines, which are responsible for accepting our nutrients as well. So we have to kind of get into that. Are we being slowly poisoned to the point where we can't recognize food for food?
Well, and think about this. Chemotherapy is poison. It's deliberately poisoning a person's body to kill cancer cells, but it also kills healthy cells. And when your body reaches that level of toxicity, your hair all falls out. In a couple days, boom, it's gone. And then it takes months, sometimes even years, for it to completely grow back. So those of you out there who have undergone thinning hair and hair loss over time, you are being poisoned slowly. That's why you're losing hair slowly. Don't look at your hair loss as a reason for you to find an easy fix like hair transplants and so on. Look at it for what it is. It's the canary in the mine. There's something going on in your body. Your hair is the most susceptible to showing it. If you do the things that help your hair get healthy and strong again, your whole body is going to rejoice from it.
Yeah, it's such a great point, because one of the most interesting things that happen is people forget, literally over time, that they're unhealthy. They don't realize how unhealthy or sick they were until they start to regain it. You know, they find that one of the wonderful things about using, various natural methods to restore your hair is that your libido gets better, your sleep gets better, you start to exhibit signs of anti-aging. By the way, this is really an anti-aging methodology. So I'm trying to look as young as I can for as long as I can and maintain all my faculties, as absolutely as long as I can. And people say, why do you want to live so long? I said, because I want to feel young as long as I can.
Right. Yeah, no, the people who are chronically ill don't want to live long. I want to live long. I know what it feels like to feel great. I haven't felt good in the past couple of years. I've got something going on in my gut that I believe is precipitating a lot of other issues for me. And I am going to finally address it all. I'm getting all my amalgam fillings taken out. I've got an entire protocol that I've developed myself. And I will write a book about this. If I have to go off the air to write the book and take some time off from the radio show, I will do it, because I believe that a lot of people can benefit from the journey that I'm about to embark on. But, your hair is just one of the obvious things, like the skin aging. When your body isn't doing well, you age faster. And one of the things that shows up is you start losing hair, men and women. The website is immortalhair.org. You can go there and read up. Learn as much as you can. They will direct you where you can get the supplements that they talk about. It's too much to cover in one show. Hopefully we have opened the eyes of some people to know it is possible to regrow your hair. It is possible. Don't believe what other people tell you. But the problem is that we live in a quick fix society. We want a pill. We want a shot. We want to be able to live the crappy lifestyle that we've been living, but still have our hair and muscular physiques with no body fat. And I'm sorry to tell you, it doesn't work that way. You got to address the root problems, and the end result will not only will you have beautiful hair, but you'll have a beautiful life too. So there you go. Listen, Brian, I want to thank you for being on the show.
That's been great. Great being here, Carl.
And we'll